Hi there, I'm Danny Henderson. Welcome back to my full disclosure channel. I am delighted, I am thrilled, but on words to bring to you on this great channel the one, the only, Kevin Annett. Welcome, Kevin.
Thanks, Danny. It's great to be here.
So good to meet you finally. You are not the easiest person to get hold of, but we have
Mm.
friends in common. Beverly Rhodes and who you're working with, and Sean Atwood and Luke
hmm
Eastwood. And it was so crazy because in the space of a week, I was saying to both friends, Beverly Rhodes and Luke Eastwood, about you. I'd really love to get you on my channel, share you with the audience. You are everywhere. You are working so hard. You are trailblazing through the traumas of the residential schools, the murdered, genocided Indian children across Canada, which we will come to in depth. The things that you've done for over 35 years, astonishing, astonishing. Anyway, so here you are, brag, brag, on the channel, and I'm so excited. I'm so excited. Kevin Annett, and that's how you pronounce it, guys. It's Kevin Annett. Isn't that correct, Kevin?
That's correct. Yes.
There I go, bragging again. Anyway, enough about me. Let's come over to you. Sir, would you gift us the beginning of this great life that you've had that inspired and led you to do the amazing work that you're doing? Please, the floor is yours and take your time.
Thank you. Well, like with any of us, there are a lot of influences that lead us here. But I know it's in my nature, even as a child, I was always questioning everything, but also feeling this immediate empathy for anyone getting wronged. Like the kid on the playground was getting beaten up or whatever. If I felt like it was happening to me and I couldn't just stand back, the worst nightmare in my life was the idea that I was just going along with wrongs that were happening to people. So from a young age, I became very involved, in community work. I was very politicized in that I wanted to know what was going on in the world, and I didn't want to let a few people, run things for me. I wanted to be, I guess you could call it an early sense of self-governance, which has been like a theme all through our work that we can't stand by and let these wrongs happen. When the courts and the government are complicit, we've got to take action ourselves to stop it, especially when it involves the torture and death of children. That's, bottom line for anyone who claims to be human. So that
Yeah.
drew me into, when I was in my late 20s, I was married and I went into the ministry with the United Church, which is like it's the largest Protestant church in Canada. It's like the Presbyterians and Methodists, kind of that wing of Christianity.
Mm.
And we had two daughters. When my second daughter Eleanor was a week old, we moved to a town called Port Alberni, which is on the very west coast of Canada. And it's hard. I know, being working a lot with Europeans, you can't imagine the distance and space involved in Canada. Like it takes 6 days to cross it. It's like driving from Spain to China, that
Yeah.
same kind of vast distance. So on the very west coast of Canada, there's a large island, Vancouver Island, and I took up a post there in a place called Port Alberni, which was a lumber town. And the first thing I noticed was, the congregation had hired me because they were a dying congregation and they wanted to increase their numbers. They knew I had a long history working on the streets in community ministry. So they set me to work at building their congregation, which I did. But the first thing I did is I went out to the Native community because personally I had a history. My family, a bit of family background. My mother's side of the family had emigrated from Scotland during the clearances, the Highland clearances. Our Buchanan clan had all been deported out of the Highlands and they immigrated to Canada. To the center area, it's called the Red River Settlement on the prairies around Winnipeg. And over the different generations, we intermarried with the Ojibwe and the Cree natives. And there's about 1 million Canadians called Métis. That's like mixed blood. So they're part native, part English or French. And I had a lot of these relatives. And I began to learn things at a very young age about the things you never hear about in school and the Canadian media, about what really happened, how many of them, so many of them died and everything, and were killed off. And so I had the knowledge. I was always drawn to Native people for that reason, right? It's something in my own ancestral kind of memory.
Yeah.
And on my dad's side, the name Annett, well, it was a French name because we were Huguenots, French Protestants who got burned out of France in the 1500s.
Bloody
And Queen Elizabeth,
hell. You
Yeah,
and
Queen Elizabeth.
me have been through
Yeah,
so
you too.
much. Oh my
Yeah,
goodness.
yeah. Well, that's what I mean. It's in the blood. You've got a tradition of this stuff happening.
Yeah.
And I even had an ancestor in London in the 1700s, Peter Annett, and he was a free thinker. He used to write um, these long tracts questioning parts of the Bible, questioning the corrupt practices of the Anglican Church. They threw him in prison when he was 70, stuck him in the stocks in Charing Cross.
Oh,
And so, I mean, people joke, well, maybe you're his reincarnation, Kev, because it's always the same issues coming up again. But, you know, all that influence coming to bear. So when we got out to Port Alberni, first thing I did is I went out into the native community because about a third of the town was native, but you never saw them in any of the churches. They never mixed with the whites, right? And that got me wondering. So the very first native home I went to, and this was in the summer of 1992, very first native family I met with told me a story about how this man, Danny Gus, the husband, said that his best friend had been murdered in the local Alberni residential school run by the church that I was working for. None of those stories had ever come out at that point. This was before any of the lawsuits, before the churches had to respond in some way. And he said, all the whites know about it, because I'd asked him, how come there are no natives in any of the churches or working in any of the stores? He said, they don't want us there. They know what they did to us. They killed a lot of kids. They're all buried in the hill out back, and they don't want to, they don't want us in their churches. So I brought that immediately back to the church, and I was pretty much threatened. I was said, look, I was told by the very official who then fired me about 2.5 years later, a guy called Art Anderson. He said, Kevin, you've got a young family to support, and I'd be careful about listening too much to these stories. They just hate us because we took their land. They're making it all up. Okay. And that didn't deter me. I kept going out on literally every native home I went into, I heard these stories. And I figured the best thing to do is open the pulpit, which I did. After my sermon, I would open it up. People could get up and comment, right? And Native people still, despite all the destruction in that, they're very oral. Like they have speakers who get up and tell their legends and their stories and their experiences. So they did that right away. They took advantage of that open pulpit, and we began to hear these stories right away. Now, some of the older white people freaked out because their relatives had worked in these places. Now, for folks who don't know, these so-called residential schools, they were set up by the Crown, by the Vatican, by the Church of England, and my church, the United Church. They were internment camps. Every native child had to go in there, or the parents would go to jail. That was as early as 1891. By the second year of these schools, according to the records that we published online, murderbydecree.com, all the evidence is in there. Half the children are dying every year in these places. Now, that's double the rate in the Nazi death camps. Okay, this is a huge extermination because they would bring children in, and we get this from letters of doctors who observed it. They would take the healthy and put them in with the sick, the children with smallpox, tuberculosis, lock the doors, never treat them. And then they can claim, oh, well, they died from natural causes, right? But this happened decade after decade for over 60 years. Constant practice, never stopped. And, that's why over 60 to 80,000 of these children were killed. Half of the children never came back. So I began to document this and bring it out. And the people in the church were okay with it because I was building the congregation. We went from like 10 to about 80 people in a few months. And so they were happy, but the higher ups in the church began to get worried about this. And the thing that sealed my fate was I found out that a lot of the missionaries had originally grabbed native land. They had them in England too. They're called clergy reserves. So the Catholics and the Anglicans were given all these, if a missionary went into an area, the crown would give them all this land, even though it belonged to native people. And then later, the church would sell off this land for a lot of money to logging companies, mining companies. I found out about this, and I wrote a letter that the church had done that. Next thing I knew, I was fired without cause. I was told that I had to have a psychiatric evaluation, right, if I wanted to keep my job. Trying to set me up as a crazy guy, right? They went to my wife, Anne, and said, we're going to make sure he never works again. So if you want to leave him, we'll make sure you get the kids in divorce court. And that all happened. So the very fact that they were able to guarantee that meant, okay, there's more people involved than just the church here. There's the courts, there's the government. obviously we're uncovering something very huge here that nobody wants to talk about. And the more, I lost my children, my livelihood. I was blacklisted, couldn't get work, living out of my car, literally. This is
Oh,
by 1996, and getting smeared and blacklisted everywhere. So, people suddenly became afraid of me, for no reason other than I was talking about these things. So that opened a door, though, because a lot of the native survivors of these crimes heard about me, and they started talking to me. We began to hold like talking circles where the truth would come out. We documented it. We held conferences and protests. We held the first tribunal into these crimes in 1998. And eventually, it was actually a British magazine that opened up this story internationally. It was called the New Internationalist magazine out of Oxford. And in 1999, they printed all my stuff. And suddenly, from all over the world, I'm getting stories from people who went through exactly the same things, England and Ireland, like all over, common phenomena. So we began to kind of blossom into this huge international movement about child trafficking and murder involving churches. And so, one thing led to another, and we were suddenly riding this hurricane of change. We eventually forced the government and the churches to admit some things, but they concealed a lot as well. They destroyed a lot of the evidence. Still to this day, they're even now denying that children had died. I mean, when the perpetrators are in power, they can do that. They can just make up whatever story they want. But the important thing is we had a tremendous impact, and it shows you what a few people can do, especially when they rely on themselves. And it led eventually to the setting up of a tribunal in Europe that put the Pope on trial and forced him out of office, Ratzinger, Pope Benedict. We indicted him and Queen Elizabeth and 30 other people for these crimes, and set up an international common law court to do it. So, I mean, all of that has kind of led to the present day where it's, a lot of these, not only the crime, but how to deal with it, how to set up citizen courts and tribunals to bring out the truth. It's inspired people all over the world to do this. And so, I often say to people, I can die happy because I helped. Not only did I not go along with this stuff, but I helped change things in a big way, and showed people that one person can make a tremendous difference. You just can't ever give up. And you got to always remember, it's about those children in the ground, the ones who are going to suffer tomorrow if we don't do these things, right?
yeah, yeah. My God, Kevin, that is just so incredible. And what a synopsis. I'm just going to share some of the information that you dropped regarding the murder by decree, which is the report that you
Yeah.
created to expose the genocide in Canada. And it was written against the Truth and Resilience Commission, a bunch of Billy bullshitters who tried to say
Right.
everything was fine. And you're like, no. And so a couple of
Mhm.
days here for people to do their own research, because it's not good enough that we come together, let's say you and I, we're here to show the world the uncensored reality, the cruelty of the monsters who've been running our planet, for them just to bloody well scroll on. They've got
Yeah.
a responsibility and a voice and a soul like you and I have. They're not going to get
Yeah.
beaten up and made homeless and put in his car and called crazy like you were in 1996. There's too many of us now. So let's do a
Yeah.
couple of points here. 1870, the British Crown, oh dear, through the Canadian Parliament, establishes what's known as a clergy reserve system, meaning they can grant huge swathes of land stolen from my Indigenous brothers and sisters and your Indigenous brothers and sisters to any Anglican or Catholic. Yeah? So along
Yeah.
comes Father Bloody John and his boyfriend. On they come, stealing the land, forcing our families out. Yeah, we know this.
Mhm.
How dare they? They've all done it. And the bloody church set this up. So any Anglican and Catholic missionary who settles on the land, usually near the advancing Canadian Pacific Railway, could just take
Mhm.
whatever they wanted. February 1919. Despite huge high death rates, and murderous conditions in residential schools. Duncan Campbell Scott. Now, here's the name of a real shithead. I know he's dead. I don't care. Duncan
Yeah.
Campbell, the big old shit murdering head. He abolished all medical inspections in the residential schools where these babies and children had been kidnapped from their parents of the tribes under threat of jail and death and rape and torture. You know how it goes. Yeah, you know how
Yeah.
it goes, people out there.
Mhm.
So what they would do is they would inject the children. Yes, they would inject the children and experiment on them. I say to people all the time, Kevin, this channel is not the snowflakes. For people with, oh, I can't stand it, oh, can't listen. Again, we've got to get past that. Oh, Nelly and her big ego, and John, thinks he's so fierce when he's actually not. It's not about us being, oh dear, that's terrible. It's like, get over yourself. We got a job to do. We're an army of
Right.
love. That's what humanity is. Anyway, so they would murder, rape, chop them up, kill them, threaten them, cut the babies' hairs, make them take stupid names, kill their indigenousness out of them. Then they would jab them with smallpox and TB, experiment on them, send them home then to their tribe.
Right.
So the
To
tribe
spread it.
wiped out, right? True, isn't it?
We even got letters. I remember a letter from a Catholic missionary in 1922 on the West Coast, reporting to an Indian agent that the children were infected, so we sent them home to their families. Now, in the white world, you quarantine somebody when they're sick with these things. Here, we even have a photograph in Murder by Decree of children sitting in a classroom with open tubercular sores, hand bandages around their heads, sitting with the other children. There's proof, photographic proof of intent to commit genocide right there. And that was in 1912 in Alberta, right? So the same groups that did it are still in power. And to show you how high up it went, there was an Anglican missionary called John Sheepshanks, and he came out to British Columbia in 1864. And in one summer, he destroyed 90% of the Chilcotin people. This is a group in central British Columbia. And he went among them with smallpox inoculations. They claimed to be smallpox inoculations. And he was a shareholder in the Hudson's Bay Company, which owned so much of the land. It was set up by actually Prince Rupert in 1670, the cousin of Charles II. And they owned they were just given half of Canada. And then they sell it off whoever they wanted and make mega wealth, right? But he was hired by the Hudson's Bay Company because they had already what's called preempted the land. So they buy up the land where all these natives live, knowing they're all going to be dead. They send out John Sheepshanks to inoculate all of them. He kept a journal about this. And, 90% of them died within that one summer.
Yeah.
Mass murder. Then he gets rewarded. He becomes the Bishop of Norwich. He gets a seat in the House of Lords. And he sits there till 1909. And he even wrote a book describing how he did this, right? And, he was an advisor to King Edward. And it's right from the top. It isn't just random bad priest. It's engineered. That's why we call it murder by decree.
Mhm.
It was engineered right out of London and Rome.
Yeah. Just to basically, I know that I will tell you the people that come to my channel, they are just so beautiful. They're so clever. They are true seekers. They are passionate. And so a lot of them will know this, but then there'll be others that there's big gaps that
Yeah.
aren't filled in. But
Right.
what we're looking at from the time we're talking that the 1800s, let's say, is a starting point, although it was happening way before. But from there, if we look in the last 3 or 4 years since they tried to obviously shut down the world, and you've got
Mhm.
monsters, genociding monsters called Bill Gates and Anthony Fauci, right? Double monsters who've given themselves roles, and others are supporting them to murder, maim, jab, kill, wipe out as many people. And
Mhm.
it's the same MO because once a bunch of monsters recognize what works, I mean, they've been
Mhm.
using China to practice on for God knows how many decades, right? Roll it all out. And so they took what they could of Lahaina, killed all the ancient indigenous there. It was the most royal and ancient spot for the ancient beloved indigenous Hawaiians in Lahaina, in that town. And they knew it. They took it, everything, for their smart city, for their land. We know they're doing that. They did it in Paradise, and they did it. They did it in LA as well recently. So it's like, how many more of these events are going to occur before humanity finally goes, I'm done with this. I'm not putting up with it anymore. Because the more we take it, it's like I often say to people on my channel, Kevin, I can't believe that humanity hasn't put 9/11 back on the table. What are we waiting for? That mass genocide
Well,
there.
the encouraging thing, Danny, is that I see it everywhere. People are not only aware, but they're doing stuff about this. I mean, that's how we forced out Pope Benedict in 2013 through our common law court order. The Spanish government had seen our evidence, and 6 days before Ratzinger stepped down, they had written to him saying, "You could face arrest if you come to Spain because you've been writing letters to bishops telling them to cover up the trafficking and killing of children." He resigned, so did three other cardinals, right, including the head of the Jesuits, Adolfo Pichon. They're all knocked out. Boom, boom, boom. Well, naturally, the corporate media doesn't want to make it seem like it's because of what we did. So the whole thing was fogged. But in the wake of that, there was this bursting movement all over the world that happened, common law awareness. So you have common law education groups and courts being set up everywhere now because they saw that it worked. We proved that it works. You can start to change things by spotlighting and forcing out these people and taking back power into your own community, because that's the only thing that's going to guarantee us stopping these crimes. It's up to all of us, right?
That's so beautiful. Let's stay
Yeah.
there a little bit. Let's share with people the system and the mechanics and the thinking through of that 2013 takedown of Ratzinger. And you mentioned the Jesuit, the head of the Jesuits. Tell us his name again, please.
At the time, his name was Adolfo Pachon. He was the
Okay.
so-called Black Pope, but they were all involved in this network called the Ninth Circle. It's a child sacrificial cult that goes back at least to the time of the founding of the Jesuits in the 1500s, probably before that. And it's like the Catholic Mass, where you believe that you're eating the literal body and blood of Christ, right? And it gives you eternal life. They believe that too. You take a child and you rape and torture them, cannibalize them, eat them, and usually newborns, but other children too. We have now 5 eyewitnesses who took part in these things, and they're even mentioning the present guy who's in, Pope Leo, Robert Prevost. A woman has identified him at a ritual where he became a member of the Ninth Circle, and she was raped. She was a 14-year-old girl at the time. She was raped by him, watched as he and others, including former Pope John Paul II, were involved in these ritual slayings of children beneath the Vatican Square, St. Peter's Square. And so all of the evidence is there. And, that is one of the reasons these people step down, because there's others who could be implicated unless they take the heat. So, you retire them away somewhere and hope people forget. But the point is, these practices carry on all the time, right? And we've gone in and actually stopped some of these ceremonies in Montreal and in Belgium, other places. We've had the support of police who go in and once they're aware of these things, but they've got this cult has so much political and financial support that it's really hard to break through that. But you got to keep at it. That's the point, right?
Mhm. It's beautiful to hear as far back as 2013 because there was an emotional, spiritual, kind of astronomical breakthrough with the 2012, whatever that was for people, whether they believed in something happening or not. There was an uprising in people, and there's absolutely every proof that people are in a mass awakening period. And I keep saying, reminding that the spells and the black magic of the occult that bound the planet, that this, because humanity is awakening and arising and ascending, that love frequency, that light just bursts through, and it really does. It's not wishy-washy spiritual nonsense, it's actual fact. And you can look at now 7 out of 10 people that will push back on something. I know I mentioned 9/11. I find that still frustrating because I think if enough people did really pay attention to that, that would be another like bang, like a clanger, like how, oh my God, how did I miss that? But like you said, there's definitely evidence everywhere of so much happening and connecting, within people. And you are a person who has been a trailblazer. Now, I came across you years ago, and I was even in Costa Rica, and a woman out there introduced you and your work to me. And then I've just been watching, you, and then you were quiet for a while. It seemed. I mean, there's so many areas of the internet, YouTube. I mean, we don't all watch the same thing. So for all I know, you've just been doing broadcasts every single week. But
Oh
it's
yeah.
like, yeah, it's like at the moment, it's just this massive. Like Kevin Annett is everywhere. He's just everywhere and inspiring and kicking in doors and opening the minds of people. What can you tell us
Yeah.
about the Jesuits? Because there's so much misconception about them, who they are, how they. I don't mean every single Jesuit. Obviously, this is where people get silly. They put people like all the Freemasons in one box and this in one box. And but could you tell us? Because you mentioned the Ninth Circle and how they're involved.
Well, on the first point you made, I've never gone silent, as you can imagine. What's happened is about 90% of the stuff we have posted on has been completely swabbed off the
Yeah.
internet. So if you didn't hear about it, it's just because I was being censored. Um, YouTube and Google and that, they're owned by Big Pharma, by GlaxoSmithKline, Big Pharma in the UK, and that. And so they just automatically censor out a lot of the stuff we're talking about because it tends to lead back. I mean, Big Pharma has been using children experiments for generations, and they did in the Indian hospitals and schools, right? And a lot of them died from it. Medical genocide. So they've been part of the people in the defendant's box, if you like, in this whole trial, ongoing trial. But what we learned about the Jesuits early on is that, I mean, they were set up by a mercenary soldier, Ignatius Loyola, in the early mid 1500s, and his job was to kill Queen Elizabeth I and incite English people to overthrow the monarch because she was the only Protestant monarch resisting the Vatican in Spain. And also, she was given sanctuaries to people like my ancestors. Any religious dissident, any Protestant in Europe could come to England and give sanctuary, be given sanctuary in that. So she would like define Rome directly. And so Jesuits were set up to take her out. And they became a secret army that took a personal oath of loyalty to the Pope. But at the same time, they operated as their own church in many ways. Like, for example, they went around the world. Over here in Canada, they pitted the Huron, they controlled the fur trade, which is very lucrative. And they pitted the Huron people who were French speaking against the Mohawks who were English and allied with the British. And they fomented the French and Indian War. They armed both sides. They created conflict and then profited from it. They owned the arms, they owned the fur trade. Still to this day, the Jesuits are a big financial power. They own, like in Citibank, Bank of America, HSBC Bank. They're all Jesuit pretty much funded because something like 85% to 90% of all the world's bank deposits go through the Vatican Bank through various offshore accounts. So they've got access to all that money, and with that, they're heavily into the arms industry, the big pharma. Like it's huge. Even a lot of online porn companies, Vatican Bank owned, run by Jesuit front companies. And so they were like in the forefront of our campaign to expose Vatican crimes because they're really, in many ways, the power behind the throne. The Pope is a figurehead and just the hand puppet to distract people. The College of Cardinals and their Jesuit backers, they're really the ones who call the shots. And these days, they're shifting a lot of the Vatican Bank money east to China. That's what's really going on. And like China is the only country in the world where the government gets to appoint the Catholic bishops and the cardinals, like they're working directly with China. In fact, the Vatican Bank a few years ago, the present or the previous guy, Pope Francis Jorge Bergoglio, who had a lot of blood on his hands as well, coming out of South America, but the Vatican Bank agreed to underwrite the Chinese up to $1 trillion every year because they're buying up all the resources, the highways, the ports, all over North America. They're pretty much buying up America. And because they're the rising power in the world, and the Vatican, like the Chinese, have a very kind of emperor notion of control. You've got one guy in charge, and everybody goes along. And England law and the tradition, the people governing themselves, that's a real threat to that. So, I believe that one of the reasons there's some conflict in America, if you were the Chinese, you'd want to fund both the Democrats and the Republicans to tear each other apart, because that way the country's divided. Like it says in The Art of War by Sun Tzu, the Chinese general, he said, you get your enemy to destroy themselves and you never have to fight them. And I see that going on now, and it's Vatican and Jesuit funded, a process they want to encourage all the time. And so, I mean, yeah, that was a long way of answering your question about the Jesuits, but they've been a real force behind a lot of these genocidal crimes, right?
Mhm. That was beautifully answered, and thank you for taking your time because it's so important that we bring in all the different multi layers because people, sometimes people like me, we need to hear it 3 or 4, maybe more times in order for all the parts to kind of regroup or
Right.
recognize with each other to land the information that we can then hold on to. Some people get it first time round, others don't. But it's also one of the things that people are coming to understand, and when this is where the ego comes in, that when you hear something so horrific, and let's say you've worshipped the popes and you've been a good old Catholic your whole life and you've believed them all, you have to face the fact that you were wrong. We were all wrong because we were all lied to. And there are people that still have a hard time letting that go, that acceptance that they
Yeah.
were. But then they've got to remember their ancestors were wrong too, their parents, grandparents, great grandparents. So it's like, get over yourself, John. Time to let that go. Let's just move along here. We got work to do, you
Right.
know. So
Right.
interesting because I look at how some people have had time to assimilate information and then recognize, okay, here's what's going on. Others have refused, still refuse, push back, fight, argue, blackmail, bribe, attack, make up all kinds of shit. And then finally
Yeah.
at the end, now it's going to be like, bang, okay, because you chose not to pay attention. Now you're going to get it,
Mhm.
in a bang. And I kind of feel a little bit sorry, but not really, actually. I don't think I do care. you know, so
Yeah.
I've given you
I
enough.
hear you.
Uh,
Yeah. I hear you. Yeah. Very
yeah,
much.
yeah.
Mhm.
Let's have a look at jumping forward, because obviously this is your life mission to expose the horrors of the past. And there had so many babies and children that were completely ruined, genocided, destroyed, mentally, emotionally, physically, unalived.
Mhm.
There's got to be in the millions of skeletons of these beautiful beings underground in different places. And I know that if you probably could raise everyone and bless them and give them a beautiful burial or an honoring of their soul on this planet, that you certainly would. And I know there are others alongside that agree with you. If we look at the end of this, okay, because it's ending, it's coming to an end, all the genociding, all the everything. Um, how do you see it playing out? And do you see any particular key players on the field now that will be standing alongside you in this work?
Well, just on the first point, I've excavated with native elders. I've excavated some of these mass graves in Canada. I've held the bones at the Church of England School in Brantford, Ontario, the oldest one in Canada. We've had eyewitnesses who took part in the burial of children, saw children thrown into the furnaces, newborns. They often did that. The principal in 1948, the principal at that place, um, Mr. Zimmerman, said in a letter, "We're forced to bury the children 2 or 3 to a grave." So I mean, there's massive death rate, and you know, so the problem with even getting people to look at that is that it, when you win a war, you can ignore the consequences of it, right? And that's the situation we're in. The perpetrators are still in power. They write and rewrite the narrative all the time. And to make it seem like, well, a few unfortunate things happened, but now we've apologized and given the money, and it's all better now. And in fact, it's worse. And it's getting worse all the time. I mean, and one of the things we document now is all of the native families going missing all over northern Canada because of the oil and gas projects that China is involved in. They just terrorize the people off the land. A lot of young Native women are brought in as prostitutes for these workers. They go missing. You never see them again. It's all of northern Canada. It's rich in uranium and oil and gas, and so these people are still in the way. And what do you do about it? You've got to kind of raise not just awareness, but people's willingness to act, because these institutions are very vulnerable. When they began to buckle in 2007 and 8 and began to admit things, it's because we were going into churches on Sunday morning. These nonviolent protests would just walk into the church and start talking to the parishioners, would have a banner. All the children need a proper burial. Often the priest would run out the back door because they knew they were guilty, right? They just run away. And that's kind of a metaphor for when light shines on darkness, it runs. And you just have the courage to go in there and do that. And Native people since then have gone in and ordered the Catholic priests and the Anglican priests out and take over the building and say, we have the right of reparations for all the our people that you wiped out. We're reclaiming these buildings and the land now. And for us, that's a model of what people can do, right? We don't allow criminal bodies to continue. And when the crown itself is being involved in criminal activity, the whole country can be taken back by the people lawfully, right? It even says that in Magna Carta, that the people have the right to do that. So that's why there's a movement in England now to set up a republic like we've done in Canada, outside crown jurisdiction. It's really the only way that you can put them on trial is in your own courts, under your own jurisdiction. Because the crown courts, we learned that early on, they just back these crimes to the hilt, and they just sidetrack everything. And so we need our own courts of justice. And, that's what caused the revolution in America, and in 1776. And it's the same idea that people have had enough of these unaccountable monarchs, whether they're in Rome or London or anywhere, right?
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, again, the model, the ancient model of one leader or one king or one queen, it doesn't
Mm.
work. How many more generations do these numbnuts at the top have to see that? Because we, the people, we see that it doesn't work and we're not allowing it anymore. And I speak my mind, as you know, and I'm very outspoken, but I pray that people are going to listen to me gobbing off and speaking my mind because I can if I want to. And then
Mm-hmm.
something sparks in them and they go, I can say what I like too, and they
Right.
break the spell they're under. I
Right.
also really piss people off because they find it too much. You know what I mean? They're like, oh, who's that awful woman? But it doesn't matter. Whatever it's going to take, whatever level of being bombastic it takes, for someone to go,
Mm-hmm.
actually, I've never seen that kind of pushback on the greatest authority on the planet. Nothing great about them, my darlings. Nothing great whatsoever. And I'm looking for the heroes. The heroes are people like and Maureen Sullivan, who you're going to meet, who's another friend of mine, who came on my channel, spoke about her being so a dirty paedophile in her family helped himself to her little body, but of course it was her fault, because she's six
Right.
years old,
Yeah.
so she seduced
Yeah.
him. And how many other children have we heard that about? So poor little Maureen's put in a convent, and when the authorities would come and check on the kids, they put her in a tunnel. Over time, she
Yeah.
discovered that there were hundreds of skeletons of babies. She calls it the shit pit. And I promised her that, Maureen, I promise you that Elena Danan, Danny Henderson, Luke Eastwood, who you know, who just interviewed you. You should watch that, guys, on Luke Eastwood's channel too. Fascinating with Kevin. And Luke's bringing you all together this week to discuss the exhuming of these babies on every bloody culture on our
Right.
planet, every country,
Right.
right? The indigenous, the constant genociding that to this day is going on. Why do you think the so-called elites are so terrified of the pure and beautiful bloodlines and the rich DNA? What do you think their ultimate issue is?
Well, I mean, they're dead, and they want everyone to be dead like them, just at a basic level, right? And it's spiritual vampirism, energetic vampirism as well. In these ninth circle ceremonies, they literally believe they're taking the life of the innocent and restoring themselves, you know. And it's also lucrative. You make a lot of money trafficking children, making what are called snuff films, where you film all this. And that's what happens during these ceremonies. It's also filmed of children being ripped apart. And then they sell it for a lot of money, you know. The church has done that for a long time, you know. So I mean, the point is, people literally have to find the places where these bones are and go and dig and film it and say, this is what you're all part of. This is what, when you put money in the collection plate on Sunday, that's where it's going, to help cover this up, to help kill children. Now, if you then go along with it and keep paying it, you're an accessory under the law. You're funding the murder weapon. And we have every right to arrest you, too. I mean, people, you got to draw a line and say, what line are you guys on now? We can't straddle this bloody fence anymore, right?
Yeah. During my time, I lived in America. I told you I lived in Canada, Calgary, Alberta for years. I lived in America, Florida, and California mostly, Hawaii,
Mm.
Kauai, and whereas Costa Rica, that's just now back in England, just the last few years. And in the churches that I visited for different reasons, You know, you watch all these people who are so programmed and terrified into tithing, giving parts of their money because they're so terrified and they're threatened and they've got to do it. And also, like in America, I forget what they do in Canada because it's so long since I lived there. But in America, they are destroying every family because the threat of their healthcare, they force them into paying for healthcare 600,
Yeah.
700 plus dollars that these people they
No,
don't have. They don't
no,
have that. And it
no,
destroys them. It kills families. It's so
no,
cruel and so brutal. And they
no.
don't, that they're so under the spell that they must have their health care and they must give their 10%. And these people that create these, you know, they're laughing at them. Some of them need,
Hmm.
you know, the diabetes. I mean, oh my God, I could tell you where the cure is via a friend, David Adair, and one of the NASA outlets, one of the NASA lots is where the diabetes, he's been on my channel too and spoken at my conference, and so many people know David Adair. It's like this whole puzzle of everything, disease, children, schooling, education, science, religion, everything is being exposed. And there's so much filth and corruption in each and every beautiful thing. But on the opposite side, there's equal beauty and balance and everything else. And I know you and I are talking about just the worst imaginable, the worst snuff films with babies. You know, you mentioned newborns. People forget that these children that are incarcerated and were in these homes, men are coming in and helping themselves to them. Little girls and little boys, and little girls are getting impregnated and they're taking the babies out earlier. If they make it that long, then they'll use the aborted fetuses,
Hmm.
I love them, in sacrificial rituals, Satanism, and it all leads round to the same thing that the
Hmm.
occults that run the planet, their god is Satan, and they make constant sacrifices to Satan, don't they?
That's right. It's at the center of all this, really. And I would say that the power, kind of the energy in the system that runs the planet, is satanic in nature, right? And um, before the church, in the early people around Jesus, in the first century or two before the church came about, they very much believe that when you're born into this world, you're born into a state of spiritual possession. And the only thing that frees that is an act of grace or spiritual opening. But then after that's touched you, you're separated from the world and you can't go along with it anymore. Every day is a resistance against the powers of the world to corrupt you, right? And I mean, our ancestors had a strong sense of that. And all you have to do is walk into Westminster, go to the tomb of Oliver Cromwell, and right on the side of his tomb is written, Christ, not man, is king, right? And that belief that no, not the Pope, not the King of England, but Christ himself and the Christ within all of us. That's the head of our quote church. And our allegiance is to God, not man. It's that simple, right? And that gets you in trouble when you put it into practice. It's like I used to say in sermons, it's fine to sit here and listen to all this, and you can get along and you won't be harmed. As soon as you try to practice it, that's when you see the nature of this world, because they will come down on you like they did on me, try to do everything possible to destroy my life, rip out my heart. And something I don't always talk about a lot is the exorcisms that I've participated in, where I've encountered this entity, right? And the hold it has over many people, right? I mean, I've literally seen it. And that's why in 2009, I went to Rome and actually did an exorcism at the Vatican. And the next morning, a tornado hit. You might have heard this story. It was fantastic. Downtown Rome, first tornado in 48 years. It's Rome. After that ceremony, where I called out the entity of Rome to name itself, to reveal itself, that same week in the European press are the first reports of Pope Benedict's role in concealing child trafficking and murder, right? It wasn't an accident. That spirit was acting through me at that moment. Boom, opened everything up. And that's the power we rely on, right? Power of God acting through us when we turn our lives over in that way. And not worry about ourselves anymore, because I mean, it's our fear and self-concern that gets in the way often of, not, we shouldn't be worrying about what's going to happen to me if I do this. It's what's going to happen to the child if I don't.
Yeah.
And once we made that shift, we're unbeatable. There's nothing that can stop us,
Yes.
right?
You know, you mentioned briefly the Rome entity, demon. Please may we visit that just for a few minutes, because I know that ultimately there's so many legends and myths that accompany a name. And we heard years ago in legend that Romulus and Remus and the wolves and the creation of Rome, etc. Please, does that have anything to do with the demonic entity that you exorcised? Who was it that you did that with? How did it happen? And what was the actual setup? How did you get there? And whereabouts in Rome did you do it? If you can share.
Right in St. Peter's Square. I was invited. This was right after we set up the tribunal in Europe, and some human rights groups in Rome had invited me to come and speak. And knowing that I was there, I brought with me some soil from the mass grave of some of the children who died in these schools. And I was going to do a ceremony for the dead children. I thought, we're right in the heart of the beast. I should do it. So I'm standing there, and I had 3 Italian friends with me. There was just us standing there, and they never let a protest or any kind of religious ceremony, spiritual gathering happen in St. Peter's Square. It's heavily monitored. The Rome and the Vatican police grab anyone who tries that. And in fact, they had done that. A group of 13 indigenous grandmothers had tried doing that the year before, and they were arrested for holding a pagan ceremony, right? That's an offense there, right? So I kind of forgot about all that, and I just stood there and I started calling this thing out. Because I had been involved in twice before in exorcisms, where first stage is you call out, this entity to reveal itself, right? So I just started doing that, and it was so funny. These cops were walking by me like I wasn't there, right? Like they looked literally right through me, and I was untouched the whole time. Now, when I went back home to the West Coast and told some of the native elders, they just sat there and went, "Yeah, well, you told us you're descended from my mom's family were O'Neills, who were the last of the Druid chieftains in the north in Ulster, the last of the High Kings of Ireland. But they were Druids as well, and Druids could shapeshift. They could control the weather." And they said, "Well, it's your ancestors acting through you, Kevin. It's not rocket science. It's obviously going on there, right? You were just a vessel for that." And it happened right above, and I didn't know it at the time, in the middle of St. Peter's Square is like an obelisk. And these are taken from, remember the Colosseum, where they were just centuries of slaughter and torturing and killing people. That's what's all around St. Peter's Square. It's an energy receptacle for that. And the 9 circle ceremonies happen right under that place. It's a grotto, series of old Christian catacombs they use for their ceremonies, including the present Pope Leo, who's seen there doing that when he became a priest in 1978. So it was a hotspot energetically, but I didn't know it. I didn't know I was standing right above it, right, at the time. And it was a focal point there for kind of inverted, how energy inversion, right? They take, something pure and then invert its power. Well, I did the opposite unknowingly. I inverted its energy, and that's what caused this door to open. That's still open, right? All of these things are still coming out. So, that's kind of in a nutshell how it happened. And I'm still untouched. I mean, I know you have a protection around you when you're doing the right thing. You just have to rely on that and trust that.
That is so beautiful. Another friend of this channel, I told you earlier, I'm just so amazed how we all find each other. All find doing the work, whistleblowing, disclosing information, disclosing the wrong things against our brothers and our sisters. We find each other. And one such lady is Max Lowen, who was born into a wealthy bloodline family, satanic bloodline family. And her uncle would bring her to Italy every summer. And she was trafficked underneath the Vatican, saw the throne seat to Lucifer there, watched so many ceremonies, children unalived, was hung on a cross with animals who were crucified around her, anything to terrorize her and loosh. And they would take her to the edge of being unalived, of course, and then right back into her body. And her whole brand that she now speaks out is called Unbroken. And it's such a beautiful testimony to other beautiful men and women who've survived these atrocities, whether they're bloodline families or, that managed to escape, is that most of the people that I bring on my channel like Beverly Rhodes, Rachel Vaughan in Australia, Gloria Masters in New Zealand, Kathy O'Brien in America, speaking at my next conference, Max Lowen. They're all so healed to a point, Kevin, that they live to heal and raise humanity up. That's what they do.
Mhm.
And I'm so,
Mhm.
it's the hope that you get, the hope that is there, that these people
Mhm.
can survive, can come through, and can continue to, to heal and for others to come forward. I find that just so beautiful.
It is. It's one of the things that keeps you going, but you also find within yourself that's where the power resides, right? When you've had everything stripped away, you can discover that there's something they can never take from you, right? The thing that's eternal, you know, your soul, and you're part of the soul of God, and so you rely on that, and it, I've had so many examples of that, stories, just how people are freed by that. Like there was that case of, you might have heard of a native man called William Coons, who, my friend, who he was very involved in a lot of our protests and everything, and he had survived horrible things in the Kamloops and Mission Catholic death camps. I don't call them schools because they weren't. That's a cover name. These were internment camps. And he saw Queen Elizabeth and Philip take 10 children away in October of 1964 when they were on a so-called royal visit to Canada. The children were never seen again. And that's one of the reasons she was a defendant in our case in their court trial we brought in 2012 against her and Ratzinger and others. And William couldn't ever, at first, he couldn't go near a church because whenever he heard a church bell, he'd start spontaneously like vomiting and getting ill, because when he was a young boy, he was descended from what are like spirit dancers. These are bloodlines of the shaman and the sacred people with the sacred knowledge, and they would tended to target them and destroy them, like the way the Romans destroyed the Druids in the British Isles, because they had the knowledge and the wisdom, right, and the long continuity. And so they targeted William all the time. They would put him on a rack and sodomize him with an electric cattle prod all the time. And so, I mean, these priests. And he couldn't go near a church. The day we first occupied Holy Rosary Catholic Cathedral in downtown Vancouver, I'm looking around and there's William, and he's inside with us. And he's handing out flyers with a big smile on his face. I've got a film clip of this I'll send to you, filming it. And you wouldn't know he had any fear because, and I said to him later, I couldn't figure this out. I said, William, like, how did you do that? How did you come in? He said, I showed up and I saw all of you going in, and I didn't want to let you all down. I wanted to be there and I'd take part. And I realized that was like an exorcism. Our power together, the love we had and the determination held each other up. And it's what got him to overcome that. And he stopped drinking that week, right? 20 years of counseling didn't do a thing for him, but together we recovered and we overcame that. And we didn't just heal, we transformed. We transformed the whole energy. And that same month, the government starts announcing, oh, we're going to look into these missing children. But they never did. But the point is, we had stimulated that. Just a handful of us had done that because of the spiritual power, like in Rome that time, right? It comes through us acting together, not just seeking our own individual answers to these things, right?
Absolutely, absolutely. That's so beautiful.
It's beautiful.
It's
Yeah.
people trying to understand like a demonic possession, a dark spirit possession, that even these beautiful children, they will attract attachments going through such terrible dark, and I know that for myself because I was surrounded, like I told you, my, connection with demons coming for me and the big mouth and the bright light. I obviously came into be to kick ass and take names my whole lifetime. That I was screaming out, praying as a child for protection from all kinds of terrible things, can bring attachments. And I had so many attachments. By the time I realized I was in terrible trouble, a beautiful mentor and teacher that I had, Chris Lamont, Dr. Chris Lamont, he's like, my God, he goes, you've got so many entities in your field. It's amazing that you're not fully possessed. And if I can admit that on my channel, because I'm not a liar, and I'm here to help and support too, then others can accept that
Mm-hmm.
they also have attachments. And someone I know I was so close to just a few weeks ago is completely surrounded by darkness and entities has gone a complete right-hand turn. His information is completely the opposite to what he's been putting out for 25 years. And people got a good example now to look at someone who's under a possession right now. It's
Mhm.
important that we, kind of raise these things, but also recognize
Right.
that we can come out of these things too. You mentioned, I'm British, the British people and the Canadian people that love royal family, right? I couldn't care less about them, but personally, and I guess you call me, I was a royal nanny. I mean, a royal nanny in terms of my nursery nursing took me right up against Kensington Palace when Diana and Sarah Ferguson were alive. So I got to hear some of the inside gossip, and it was good. It was funny. It was nothing terrible, but I work for the gentry, for the aristocratic. Okay, so I got a good peek inside certain things, but I digress. Or am I just bragging? Let me have a think about that. I want to say,
No, it's all connected.
I mean, again, I think something happened today. What was it? Something happened today. Oh my God. Hemet in California, Hemet. Hemet. Hemet is a place in California. I must have been there 15 times, driven through to go up to a beautiful place called Idlewild. And Idlewild is an ancient former indigenous settlement. Now it's a little town, little shops, little mountain. Oh my God, they've taken an aerial view picture of Hemet and it's all blue roofs. And they called it, I forget, it's like the Bilderberg or something, some disgusting elite group, the Freemasonic Blue
Mm.
Lodge. That's their headquarters. And I say to myself, Kevin, how the hell through my lifetime so far, or how sometimes I feel like I'm right up against where the worst things are happening. Or I know someone on the
Right.
inside, I don't, but I think it's a guidance. It's like, yeah, Danny, you went there, you were going to remember
Right.
it.
Right.
Oh my God. And it was funky
It's like it's like what it's like what I experienced in Rome. You're protected. You're like, and that was the when I said William Coons was a spirit dancer. That's their word for the same thing, which is you move between the worlds, and you're not touched by it because you've transcended this 3D reality or 4D reality, and we're kind of here but not here. That sense. It's like children at a young age often have that sense that like this is just not real, right? Like I'm not part of this,
Mm.
and I think we need to make that as real in our lives as so-called reality that we go through every day, right?
I know I distracted myself. I did say I'm not the sharpest egg in the attic, but I wanted to come back to the royal family. And I'm not sorry either. But anyway, so I wanted to come back to the royal family because in England, you dare mention anything about the Queen and Philip, who I met them both. She nearly bloody run me over in her car. Anyway, I digress again. But people can't stand to hear anything against them. But might not know the story that you passed over regarding Darling William. The this
Oh
woo,
yeah,
oh my God, my light just got knocked off. Just got knocked
there
off.
you go.
Balls, let's
Yeah.
carry on, Kevin. Let's talk about the unspeakable event where royal members were there and children went missing. Please take the floor for those that have never heard this true account before.
Do you mean the thing I mentioned in Kamloops with the children, or the other? There are other things connected to the British and the Dutch and the Belgian
Oh,
royal families.
share it all, or share some,
Yeah.
and we'll come back and share the rest. But when
Well,
Philip and Elizabeth took Tinker's children for a walk.
yeah. Well, I mean, we've had psychic investigators. We've had people who've accessed the archives showing all this stuff happened. Right? They were there. They did take the children away. One of the psychic investigators, she's police accredited. She finds bodies all the time for the missing children cases and that. Her name is Yvonne. She came out to the Church of England school I mentioned where we found the bones, and she stood there. She was just standing and looking at everything. Said, "Oh yeah, they were hanging children there. They buried them over there.
Oh my
They've
God.
taken them down beneath." And she said, "I see priests in red robes, but they're Anglican and Catholic because in practice, there's no difference between the two." And she said they're doing experiments to see how much pain the human body can take and the human mind. And then, in fact, those pain threshold experiments were a big focus of a lot of the military research using children in the 50s and MK Ultra and all of that. It was military prompted because they wanted to see how to get a soldier to keep fighting even though their body's being tortured, what you need to do. But in so doing that, they unlocked other aspects, which is now leading to their mind control techniques they're using on all of us. Where the early mind control experiments were crude; they were physical, like lobotomies, right, or electric shock treatment. Second stage was chemical, a lot of these drugs, but they find that chemicals didn't have the same effect on everybody. Human biochemistry is different. Eventually, they got to electronics, which is what we're in now, because the brain waves, they're just electronic waves, and they can duplicate those waves and put in false memories, false ideas. I've literally seen whole groups of people just clicked right off and changed overnight. But that's because they're plugged into the medium, like the iPads, and they've had the nanoparticle injections through the vaccines and all that. So they're become an extension of this machine mind. That's Elon Musk's agenda, to make everybody just cybernetic organisms, like in a sci-fi movie where you're just attached. And that's the real danger. The royal families have been at the heart of all of that because they provide the children, they provide the cover in which a lot of these experiments can happen. And we've seen that two of our eyewitnesses, Tos Nienhaus and Anne-Marie van Bienberg, they were born into the Ninth Circle cult. You sacrifice your eldest child. The other children are then used in the cult. And she saw Philip and Charles both at Carnarvon Castle, all during the 70s and 80s, involved in these same rituals. Every pope, anyone who becomes pope, has to take part in these rituals at a young age. Like the present guy, Pope Leo, when he did this when he was 23, in the year 1978, when he took part in that ceremony beneath St. Peter's Square, his name went on a red list. These are safe candidates for pope. If you don't go along with it, like me, you go on a blacklist and you're never involved in the hierarchy at all. So anybody in there, they sometimes talk about these archbishops who are critical, that Archbishop Vignano who said that there's satanic practices. The point is that you don't get into that position of authority unless you know these things are going on and you collude to some degree, right? Mm-hmm. So at that official level of the way monarchs operate, because they're beyond questioning, it provides a perfect medium for all these crimes, and that's why that's the first place you look. The people who are most, quote, revered and most protected, they're the ones who are doing it. They're set up to do it that way. So, I actually 58% of Canadians don't want a monarch anymore. They're in favor of a republic, and I think if you talk to a lot of people in England these days, they'd have the same opinion, but you're never going to see that in the corporate media, of course, right?
Yeah. Yeah, no, there are a lot, like me that, couldn't care less. I mean, it's just like, what are you doing? Because
Right.
grooming, it ends up, there's ancestors and decades of families who are groomed and programmed by accepting, oh, there's Princess Anne, there's Prince Philip, there's Prince Charles. And, I played polo. I had my own horses and played polo. And so I was running in a circle for a while. And again, I never saw a single thing. I saw a couple of shit-heady people, nasty rich people who were very vile, and I never went near them again after giving them a piece of my mind and some good advice and good, healthy, wholesome advice. And that wasn't appreciated. But anyway, I never saw, but again, I was still running in those circles. It's just so crazy how we are exposed to things, but also how the body is this great barometer, and can read and recall again smells and sounds and feelings around places and people. I use an example of in my book, Angels, Demons, and Aliens, where I was 11 years old walking along the street, and this boy was walking towards me, and I was at that age where everything is so embarrassing. You're going to die if a boy walks past you. And at church, that I was forced to go, evangelical, Pentecostal, nutty, 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 right? And saying all the kids are sinners and all those lies. This boy's walking towards me, and he looks like Archangel Michael. He's got this blonde curly hair and these big blue eyes and these full lips, and I'm going to die of embarrassment. I don't know what to do with myself. But as soon as his frequency just touched my electromagnetic field, all I could hear was the screams of hell, the damned, the souls of hell, and the smell of death. And I learned at that age, oh my God. Anyway, he went on to become a terrible, a serial killer, murdered lots of young girls. Yeah, yeah. So it's interesting again for people as they're listening to us. to remember and map
Right.
their own journey, because little triggers come up in us at this time of healing that it's important to revisit. You don't have to go into being a victim or a martyr.
Mhm.
It's the balance in between of having the experience and gathering memories that a lot of us we tune out because we can't face some of the things that have happened. But as a collective now, there's a mass healing going on, isn't there?
Yeah, and a transformation happening, you know, in the all over the world. I see it because I travel a lot and I work with a lot of groups, and you see it everywhere. But everyone feels they're all on their own, you know, and you've got to unite them with that sense that you're not alone ever.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, listen, we could go on for 15 more hours very easily. And I do want to invite you to come back to go more into the mechanics of the Vatican and the kind of hierarchical religious
Yeah.
structure across the world here. But let me invite you to tell our beautiful audience how they can connect to you, what books you think would be most helpful for them to read that you've written or involved in, etc., and how basically we can just, spread the word of your great work.
Well, my email angelfire101 at protonmail.com, and that's how to reach me directly. Murderbydecree.com is the main website. Amazon.com has all my books. You just stick in my name, Kevin Annett. I've written 28 now, um, and about all of this stuff, but also related manuals. Like we've set up a manual to teach people how to create common law courts. A book on sovereignty I just wrote on personal, political, spiritual sovereignty and how they all intermesh and things like that. I'm planning to come to Europe in the fall, and there's people in England who are already booking me in. I was deported from England in 2011 when I was to address a rally in Trafalgar Square about child trafficking by church and state, and they grabbed me at Stansted Airport and just deported me.
Oh,
But I look forward. I look forward to coming back to the land of my ancestors and meeting with all of you wonderful people. And maybe offline we can talk more about that, Danny. To just mention a few things to you.
yes, definitely, definitely. Well, I can't wait to meet you in person physically. And I know you to be an
Mm.
extremely important soul, benevolent soul on our planet. And I want anyone that may not have heard of you that will see this, us together, and the people that do come to share it out, share it wide, and recognize that not only
Mhm.
are we in a time of healing present, but we're also in a time of healing the blood spill, the pain and the anguish that is hurt and harm the planet, the feelings, the emotion that is all gathered to keep us all repressed as well. It's all part of it, that looshing, that gathering of energy frequency. And the more we open our mind to the multi different layers that we're all exposed to, the better for everyone. Everyone will find their place where they're best suited to do their inner healing, their self healing. Well, Kevin, Annett, God bless you. May the angels surround you. May you always be protected
Thank you.
everywhere you go. You are just so beautiful and so special. And I am delighted, even though the subject is absolutely horrific, I am so excited to finally meet your acquaintance. And I look forward to sharing more information with you. So thank you so much, sir.
Thank you, Danny. I appreciate it so much. Thank you.
And to you, beautiful lot watching, right? Kevin Annett was on my channel. I can't believe it. I'm darling. I am going to brag about this one. No, Kevin, I am. I really am. Kevin Annett was on my channel. Anyway. Oh, dear. To all the audience watching, God love you. God bless you. I send you so much love from my heart to yours. My name is Danny Henderson, and I will see you soon. Thanks again, Kevin.